from the willfully ignorant, the knowledge you won't get none. But don't get it twisted, I too was dumb and then some. Support a politician, sit back and then twiddle his thumbs, not understanding that you got your clothes syndrome. They have no desire to save you. It's not because the folks serving us. It's not because we don't have the right people in office. It's not because a certain bracket is just a lot less. It's not because y'all folks don't understand the process. Yo, this is all just a game, bro. Y'all support your bronies and it works well, did it so? Follow the millions to his campaign. Boy, running across till they exhaust the same thing. Then you support the lesser of the evil bankers, but it just repeats and we revisit this 4 years later. The state itself is based on theft and can't be fixed. So realize you own yourself and no one else. Here we are again, feeling so in this line we're living, singing the same old song. Are we wrong to break free from the chains we're in? They have no desire to save you. Of course, you see, I do speak cordially, not metaphorically. I like to speak informally with honesty, yet horribly. Y'all often like to appeal to all of the authority. I step ahead of y'all, that's the reason I brought my bro with me. Right on their promises, the policies is the roller, so I knew I better run, ruling over myself, no longer I know. I have a rest to tell me all of the attacks in every possible night and every positive face. There was no ifs, everyone pursuing non-aggression. Slavery's not the business of voters, of what we lacking. Right above me the cost, no matter your mental boss. Something is the only truth, to show the only cause. And let me give a shout out to the people, whoa. Rolling your balls, government when it's the thing it's all. You like it as a thing, as a rise authority. Just stay in shackles, so as long you get along the ledge. Everything is done, trendy. And in everything, things to say. That you are not a thing. Let the people go with me.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Jacob Daniel. This is the Daniel 3 Biblical Anarchy podcast, and thanks for tuning in tonight. Before we get going, I wanted to take care of some plugs and just business stuff, I guess. I have something that I've been wanting to start sponsoring in the beginning. It's a product by a friend of mine. You guys have probably seen me talk to him on Reed's show. We have our little capitalist communion little conversation we have between Christians and atheists. So Will is part of a company called Rabbit Eye Wine, and they sell this really awesome blueberry wine that we're going to be drinking during this capitalist communion episodes. And we got another one coming up this Saturday. So you'll see us all drinking it there. But it's excellent stuff, and just to kind of help him and promote that, I'm going to be drinking it tonight and promoting it on the show every once in a while too. So you can look that up on the internet. It's pretty easy to find. Rabbit Eye blueberry wine. They got different options. So like, you know, if you're into sweet wine, they got that. They got a dry one. I got the semi-sweet because I'm like halfway in the middle. I don't like it to be like super sugary, but I also don't like it super dry. So this semi-sweet is a pretty decent balance between the two. Also, like I announced last week, I did launch a Patreon, and I've had a few people sign up, so that's great. If anybody wants to support the show, as little as $5 a month, it's patreon.com/biblical anarchy. Just to help me continue to grow the show, make it easier for me to have the financial wiggle room to do more episodes and keep doing the things that I'm doing, that we're doing together. Appreciate all the support that you guys have given me. Um, and for the audio listeners, again, you can do, if you just want the audio stuff early, you can go to redcircle.com/Daniel3 Biblical Anarchy for the audio portion and sign up for $5 a month, and you get the early release of the episodes as well. I think that's it. Tonight I got a returning guest to the show. I had him on. Actually, I think he was the first person I started doing live streams with. So he's back now to return for another conversation. We're going to talk about a few different things tonight, but he's been caught up in some Twitter controversies and stuff as of late. So we're definitely going to get into that later in the conversation too. This man is one of my favorite libertarians. He's got so much going on. He's a comic book writer. He has a couple different Facebook pages. One that's called The Honest Teacher. That's one of my personal favorites. That's just calling out the problems of public schooling and the indoctrination that kids go through. And him and his wife, Fo, I'm sure you guys are all familiar with all the great tracks that those guys have been dropping, especially over the past year. Including the Disobey, which is one of my favorite ones to listen to. So I'm sure they do so much. I'm sure I'm forgetting a couple things, but one of my favorite Florida man and libertarians, Jack Lloyd. Jack, how are you doing tonight?
Good. Thanks, Jacob. I appreciate the kind words. That was very humbling. So, yeah, I'm doing great, and I'm. It's kind of wild to think that it's been that long and just how far you've come since doing that podcast we did a while back. So, I mean, man, you've really been just impressive with your output and the design elements that you've put into your production stuff. So it's pretty incredible to see your growth. I love it.
Thanks. I appreciate that. I've always been someone to think that substance is better than style, but it's good to have both. Makes it easier for people to listen to, and I'm kind of picky that way too. It's like I can't listen to something that the audio is not very crisp in, or if I was very annoyed with my lighting for the longest time, so finally got better lighting, and I don't have the time to put a nice invest into a nice backdrop or anything. So the green screen's good enough for now. It makes it look a little bit better. I was just like, screw it. I'll just, some of it was just me copying Reed. I was just like, Reed just put a green screen behind him. And actually he stopped doing that recently. Now he just is like, oh, here's the backdrop of my room. Right. I'm down in my basement. So it's just it would just be a blank empty drywall, nothing going on. But, so, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about first, everyone who's following me on Twitter and the podcast, I'm sure has followed the situation with my dad. He went into the hospital with COVID back in September, and you were one of the first people that reached out to me, and and you did it in a way that was and I know you personally, so it helped. And so it wasn't annoying when you did it. When I'm sure you know what I mean, when someone announces they have COVID, especially in the Liberty movement, it's like your inbox gets flooded with hundreds of people going, here's what you need to do,
right?
And that can be a little bit unhelpful. But from people personally, it's different. So you gave me a lot of information, and I wanted to go into a little bit of that tonight. I mean, I don't want to go super far into it, but and I do want to respect my dad's privacy a little bit, but wanted to talk a little bit. One of the things that I've had experiences before COVID that made me a bit more, I guess, distrustful of our healthcare system, and those came out even more in this experience that I went through with my dad. So, maybe you want to share some of the things that offhand, and I can, maybe like, follow up with like the things I personally experienced, but like some of the ways in which that, the healthcare industry right now is sort of dropping the ball when it comes to like providing, good healthcare to people who get the cookie virus.
Yeah, I mean, well, when it comes to the like overarching view of what's going on in the American healthcare system, and I think that this is often, a common point of criticism too, especially when people try to talk about universal healthcare or state subsidized healthcare. They often point to how terrible things are in America and say, look, see, your, capitalist system has failed. People are paying all these exorbitant prices. And it's, it's easy if you just look at the superficial to just look at that and say, oh my gosh, it's so terrible. Yeah, the market, it's horrible. Right. But obviously, if you take some time to actually just look behind the superficial and look at the history, the cronyism and the like, you start to realize that the entire system is rigged up by the state, and especially in favor of many different lobbying interests, many crony interests. And, this goes way back into the, early 20th century, moving away from community doctors where people would actually hire a doctor for a group, like almost like, you could say unionized or like based on a certain practice, like guild and things like that. They would hire a primary physician, a care physician who would work with the group, and they would all pay him directly. And then that physician would have very close relationship with those people. The reviews among them, of course, would be shared. So they know, hey, is this guy good? Any issues? Like you'd have a lot of great direct feedback. And then with the American Medical Association and lobbying efforts that came after to break up that type of relationship, there was more cronyism trying to push accrediting bodies to control what doctors did instead of having more autonomy and be able to do these types of direct deals. That and different types of insurance and healthcare regulations started to separate the doctor from the patient and their medical autonomy. And I would say, by and large, this has been done to favor certain crony pharmaceutical corporations where they wish to be able to control what doctors prescribe, guarantee that their paychecks are aligned and filled out, whether it's by the doctors complying with guidelines from centralized bought off boards, or the government directly subsidizing it by buying all kinds of medicines, outright or shots. And we saw that here again. The government subsidized it majorly, and governments around the world entered into contracts with major pharmaceutical companies in order to secure a certain large number of doses of the shots. So these types of incentives at play, really affect the quality of care, and they affect the costs of care and, of course, of medical interventions, the more so that people are being pushed onto insurances and third-party providers and government regulations and having to have X, Y, and Z, bureaucrats to manage all the paperwork. I mean, it really adds up. And I think more than ever, people are starting to come to realize this outside of maybe those crunchy circles that, you typically see with like the health people. They'll see, sometimes they might have some like dreads and stuff like that, or they wear kind of like hippie clothes, and you think like health and that kind of people. But it's really started to drift out of those circles in terms of the awareness of just how corrupt these organizations are and how much they are willing to work with politicians to secure their position, line their pockets, on tax money, and of course not provide a real solution, right? Because that's the whole thing, is if you can solve the problem, well, you don't need to keep getting the drugs they're giving you. And that ties in the drug war as well, right? The drug war is also a part of preventing solutions that might be cost effective or more readily available. You can make it at home, kind of thing. So there's a wide body of history behind all this. And, I'm simplifying it in many ways, but it's just kind of the idea here is that we're facing a huge revolving door with all the regulatory agencies in the United States government as to some of the largest pharmaceutical companies in America. You can think Merck, Pfizer, and the like. And until you really recognize that, it can be hard to understand that this is not about, people rejecting health and rejecting ways to make their lives better. This is rejecting the government trying to force medical procedures on people and to immunize legally the manufacturers who produce these things, as happened with the certain Shot Act in '86, where manufacturers are legally immunized and the government has a special master's court where injury issues are taken, and essentially make it so that these people can just do whatever they want, really and truly. They can get away with literal murder because the government, through their connected cronies, is either bankrolling them or giving them special legal privileges that keeps them from being able to be held responsible for the harms that they have caused for many people. So, hopefully that kind of encapsulates it. I know I just said a lot, but that ties all the way into now and what is happening with these shots, and what has happened specifically with the focus on shots over preventative care and trying to take care of your health to reduce symptoms or hospitalization otherwise. So they were trying to sell their solution, state subsidized with the shot.
Yeah, and that's like so much like, so my dad first got sick. That was like the entire focus was, did he have the shot or not? And there was nothing, that he got a positive test and he was told to get home and rest. There was no, it was kind of like, oh, you didn't get the shot, and it was almost like the entire way through his journey from getting sick to now, it was like because he didn't have the shot. Every time a doctor or a nurse or even just like the random people that were asking how he was doing, it was like I got really tired of that question. A lot of times I just wouldn't answer, but then it was like, well, kind of not answering gives them the assumption of what the answer is anyway. So it was like, you know what, like, I'm not gonna hide. No, he was not vaccinated. Now actually, and this is funny. I remember when I put this out there, the loser brigade was accusing me of making it up, but it's not a lie. His doctor actually told him that he should wait to get the vaccine because my dad has a certain blood condition, and they were like, until we get some more studies on this, you should maybe wait, not get it on the first initial wave. And it's like, that's a reasonable opinion, especially for like, this was his personal doctor. You know what I mean? So it's like, if your personal doctor is saying, maybe you should wait, but of course it's like, everyone's just like, no, you must, this is how you are accepted into society. This has nothing to do with it. It almost has nothing to do with health. It's just like, the shot is less about any benefits it gives you and more about like, are you one of us or are you one of them at this point? But the way he was treated by doctors and nurses, especially when they found out he wasn't vaccinated, was incredibly condescending. And it almost felt like at times that their knowledge of his vaccination status made him less of a priority to the as far as like the patients that they had there. And there was other things too that were affecting it. I mean, one of the major things I realized early on, although it was hard to realize anything because they don't let anybody in the hospital if anyone's if someone's diagnosed with COVID at my hospital, you can't go in to visit them, period. And you're allowed one visitor if it's un-COVID related. But we had to handle all this over the phone. But we realized very quickly early on how short-staffed they were. Because about like a week in, when you realize that like you were talking to the same people over and over again, and it's like, in a hospital that as big as the hospital that mine is, and like my county is not like a hugely populated county, but it's not small. Like, I mean, it's a pretty well populated county. It's a pretty sizable hospital. But you realized how badly short-staffed they are when like every day you're calling in talking to the same people almost. And like we'd call and have to wait for calls back because like they were just busy making rounds and stuff, and every update was rushed, and it's just this whole problem exacerbated by a lot of things. There's probably economic pressures going on, and there were shortages before the vaccine happened in the healthcare industry. But this was especially like this was at the height of like when nurses were being called out as one of the groups of people in America that were refusing to get vaccinated. Like I don't want to say the most, but higher than other groups, or at least higher than what was expected. And so a lot of them were getting laid off or just refusing to come to work when it was like you have to get the vaccine or you can't come to work, and so they would just quit. And so it's like it's a pandemic and we have shortages, but we're going to lay off nurses. It's like that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, they were short staffed, and that played a huge role into it too. one of the things you warned me about early on, and like all the messages you sent me was a particular drug that I'm really bad at the pronunciation. It's like Redevsmir or something like that.
Mm.
Which they were obsessed about giving him this one drug. So I'm sure there's some kind of, like you were talking about in your opening explanation. There's got to be some kind of money thing behind that.
Mhm.
That was like the treatment that they were the most convinced that they wanted to give him.
Right.
Um, and none of the things. I had the doctors pushing back at me to give him vitamin D supplement. It was like, and it's like, it's a zero. That's like, how hard is it to add a vitamin D drip or whatever they would do to supplement? You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
it's like a zero cost, zero risk proposition, and it was like, no, we can't do that. Oh, but crazy risky drug that's being reported with a lot of bad side effects that we
Right.
have to give him.
Right.
Not to mention, my dad has like I talked to his personal doctor with my stepmom. He has a history of vitamin D deficiency, and
Mm.
the doctor had already been prescribing him to take vitamin D supplements.
Wow.
But none of that mattered. It was like, vitamin D doesn't matter,
Mhm.
and proning was the thing that practically saved his life because I could hardly get them to do anything. But he took a turn for the worse in the middle of October,
Mhm.
and it was because they had been proning him at first because I had been insisting on it, and then I
Right.
stopped for a while because the doctors and nurses were literally saying, "Yeah, the proning's helping him."
Mhm.
So after like a week of that, I stopped being as insistent about it. I was like, okay, cool. They see the proning's helping him. It's a lot of work to call and wait on the phone for an hour to talk to somebody to
Mhm.
then be like, please do this. And they go, oh yeah, we're doing it. So like
Mhm.
at some point there was like, just like natural trust that like, oh, the doctors will keep on doing what's good for him.
Right.
And then he took a turn for the worse, and uh, you know, it hadn't occurred to me that they had stopped proning. And so
Hmm.
I just asked, I was like, so is he currently, proned right now? Or when you guys gonna prone him again? Because like, because they were talking to us about like, hey, he's on the max ventilator settings, and
Whoa.
he's like not getting better. And if he gets worse, we don't know what to do. And then when I brought up the proning, they were like, no, he hasn't been proned in 4 days. And
My God.
I was
Wow.
like, I don't want to say correlation is causation, but
Yeah.
if you were doing something and he was getting better, then you stopped and he tanked, it
No.
shouldn't take, like you would think people with medical degrees wouldn't need, a mechanic to be calling at them and harassing them to figure out what the right move was and it was them going back to the proning. And then for some reason they didn't want to, like, they were complaining about the proning because it was like, well, it's a lot of work to turn him over. He's got the tube down his throat for the ventilator, all the things hooked up, and
Yeah.
which were short staffed. And it was like, okay, I get that. Like, I understand
Yeah.
it's not as easy. Like, he's dead weight. He's in a medically induced coma. It's not like the easiest thing in the world. I realize that,
Right.
but it needs done. And I was like, what are the cycles you're doing? They're like, oh, we're doing like, 6 to 8 hours prone, and then like, 16 on his back. And I was like, why don't you just prone him longer?
Right.
And they were like, there was no good. Like, they tried to give me answers for why they didn't want to prone him for more than 8 hours, but it was like, there was no explanation other than, well, it's just, there's no official CDC recommendations on how long to prone for. I was like,
Yeah. Wow. Good job,
I was
doctors.
like, so
Pretty reasonable.
I held back, but like the
Yeah.
response I had in my mind at that time was, does the CDC have recommendations on how many times to wipe your ass when you
Right.
take a shit? Because if
Right.
they don't, how do you know what to do?
It's
I
insane.
mean,
Yeah.
it's just crazy. And I think there's this weird veneer around doctors that like you think they're intelligent people.
Mhm.
But my experience through this, and I had a similar experience with my daughter years ago before she had something else, but she almost died because of negligence on doctors and
Mhm.
nurses' part. I'm starting to think that, doctors are not often the brightest. They just have spent a lot of money on a lot of education, but that does not correlate to smarts. If anything, I feel like as I've become more libertarian and I'm starting to analyze it through this lens, it's
Mm.
like I almost feel like what gets you through a lot of our education um, programs, especially ones that the state's heavily involved in, is
Mhm.
not how smart you are, is not how intuitive you are, or creative you are, or good at problem solving. It's how obedient are you, and how good are you at just doing, like conforming to the
Mm.
propaganda we give you,
Right.
which are not really good traits for a doctor, to be honest.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, I agree with you there in terms of, what is typically expected of people in medical school today. From my experience in a few, places, um, my mom, she's been technically an LPN, like a nurse, since she's like, licensed in 17. And so I've had a lifetime of like stuff with knowing stuff from her. My dad had a master's in health science. When I was in school, both undergrad and grad school, I had roommates who were in PharmD, who were in medical school, like many of them actually. And I got to, talk to them about their stuff, see what they were reading about, have discussions, of course, of 7 years of post, secondary education. So I got to see, quite a bit of things, across my learning independently in college and in my law degree program. So, yeah, I mean, by and large, from what I saw there, and from also talking to other doctor friends who went to places like NYU Med School or Med School, a lot of it is just memorization. It really is about how good you are at memorizing. Yes, there's, some things that will require some thinking or memorizing processes, but by and large, it really is regurgitation. You're memorizing just a lot of different facts, processes, biological processes and things like that. Maybe a little bit of math when you're doing the chem stuff or orgo. But a lot of it is just really how good are you at repeating what is known, that is the most commonly you could say consensus approved scientific facts. How good are you at repeating those things by and large to get into med school and then do the same for all those years and then through residency. And critical thinking is a separate field of its own discourse and learning when it comes to reason and logic and fallacies and Raven analysis, things like that. So yeah, I mean, by and large, a lot of doctors these days are just, they were good at memorizing and they were good at regurgitation, and that's what got them through. I mean, of course, that's what will get you your degree, is if you're able to memorize enough to pass the MCAT and then pass your boards. So yeah, I mean, a lot of doctors are just whatever they hear from their body, from the accrediting body, American Medical Association or CDC, they just check that and regurgitate it. And of course, it's not all doctors, but a large enough contingency for it to be a real problem for a lot of people who actually want their doctors to think and not just be like, oh, let me slap on a remedy that's really just treating the symptoms and not holistically fixing the underlying solution or the underlying.
Yeah. And it's weird, and I'm sure there's other factors at play, but one of the correlations that I've noticed is that the doctors who are less specialized and people in the medical industry who are less propagandized are typically like better healthcare deliverers of healthcare. You know what I mean? Like nurses, the nurses were way more helpful than the doctors typically.
Mhm.
And like our personal doctors, just like the ones that I go to for like my personal family, my dad's personal doctor, and stuff like that, they seem a lot more reasonable than the ones that are like, you know, more specialized or working in ICUs and hospitals and stuff. And for them, it's like less about using your mind and more just about like, oh well, it's like it's like a hyper focus on what do the studies say and what does the CDC say. And I'm
Mhm.
not saying that studies have no merit. Like I'm not saying that
Right.
I want a doctor who hasn't read any studies. Of course, studies are an important part of the scientific method and the process of advancing medical uh, science and knowledge. But epidemiology studies are just like they're, they're there's a good episode on the Joe Rogan podcast where he had it was actually a debate over veganism and
Mm.
the merits of a vegan diet.
Yeah.
But I forget the name of the doctor who wasn't a vegan, but he did a really good job of breaking down the problems with epidemiology studies, which is that like they're not like, because and I think most people intuitively know this, or at least I think
Mhm.
most reasonable people do. But like you can go on Google and find a study that will support almost any claim,
Mm.
and that's because a study is sort of like a very weak test of correlation, and it's like I mean, even well done studies will typically just be like, they'll try to take into effect other factors, but it's hard to produce a test that is accounted for all possible factors.
Mhm.
And then, people will be like, oh, there was a 40% increase based upon X. It's like, okay, well, are there other things you didn't factor for that could have contributed to that increase? And unless the correlation is substantial, like, at least over 50%, ideally over 100% or more, that like, oh, you did this and then suddenly, a huge increase in this result that you were testing, a hypothesis on, like that might say something. But when people go like the one in this, I wish I remembered their names, in this Joe Rogan podcast, they were debating over if eating meat led to like a higher risk of heart disease. And it
Mhm.
was like, and the vegan doctor kept going like, oh, well, eating meat shows like a 10% increase in cholesterol based upon all these studies. It's like, okay, like it's 10%. Like
Mhm.
there are many other factors not accounted for in these studies that could have attributed to why there was a 10% different. It could have been a healthy user bias. It could have been, genetic variables in people that just naturally through their what they've inherited have different cholesterol levels. There's a lot of things that like
Right.
are it's medical studies are harder to perform than I think most scientific experiments. Because like the problem with like other fields of science, you can almost do a good job of controlling most of the variables.
Mhm.
Medical science is like 90% of your variables are what people do. And there's not a lot of like you can do your best, you can put forth your best efforts, but you can't like completely flatten the variables across a group of human beings. It's just quite hard. It's the same reason why central planning is impossible, is because of how varied humans are. And so I think it's just there's so many people that just put like such an overemphasis, I think, on the results of epidemiology studies, and rather than like those should be part of a critical analysis of pursuing the truth. Like I'm not saying like we should abandon you the scientific method in studies, but like you have to contextualize them and use them as data for trying to think critically about what the truth is, rather than just like you know reducing everything down to just a numbers calculation, because I think that doesn't work in the medical industry.
Right. I mean, I agree that by and large, when it comes to these types of studies involving human test subjects, you always just have to look at what they controlled for. Even just one, silly little thing that I saw in a trial where there was, you know, the word that I can't say being experimented, with two different groups, and in their trial, the group that had been not given that shot had a higher body mass index, typically across the people, it had a higher body mass index median than the group that had been given a shot. And this is not, in any way accounted for in the study. They just mentioned it when they did their demographics of, the participants. But when you know what I mean, little things like that, if you don't look for those kinds of things, you might be like, wait a second, you're trying to say this was marginally safer, but these people are significantly less healthy and more at risk. So you know what I mean, you're comparing apples and oranges on this a very critical factor, which is one of the big factors for those who actually have hospitalization or death, resulting from
But Jack, using critical analysis to be skeptical of people's truth claims is unscientific.
it. Yeah, right. These days, yeah. Yeah, well,
uh,
I mean, that's the gaslighting, right? They wanna
yeah,
deny that you should even want to get the skills to think through these things or even want to, read through stuff. And to me, I just find it so comedic because these same people be like, oh yeah, if you didn't go to public school, you're dumb, or you need to go to college. And it's like, well, what was the point of all that, right? You can't. So you're saying, oh, you have to go to school, and then you have to go to college where you're supposed to learn how to read studies. Like even the liberal arts majors, who are not getting science degrees, still get some type. It's in some level in their courses that are the electives, some type of generic thing where you're like looking to the basics of reading scientific studies. Like there's going to be typically a science elective within your core course for liberal arts majors. So it's like that, this is all part and parcel of the things that they're selling, that, oh yeah, see, this is how you get smart. And then it's like, oh, okay, I got my degree, I understand at least how to read studies, to a degree. I can look at it and read through it. And it's like, no, don't do that, don't don't do that now. But yeah, you need to go to public school. You need to go to college in order to be smart and to do well. But don't start using those skills that you're supposed to have from it. So it's really hypocritical. It's all just a lie and gaslighting everybody about the nature of it, which is just to get everybody addicted on government dependency. So
Yeah. Yep. Well, that's we could talk about this for hours, but there's so much that could go on there. I do want to get to the other subject we have for tonight, and so the talk about government dependency is maybe a good segue into the second subject we wanted to talk about, which is Liberty Twitter blew up over the last few weeks, and I don't even know exactly what started it. I haven't traced that back to the epicenter. But at some point, everybody on Twitter, in the libertarian circles at least, we're talking about what to do with vagrants and homeless people, like maybe in society broadly, but like especially in public areas like parks. And people were quoting like the Murray Rothbard quote during like the more paleo days late Rothbard, where he had that piece about like right-wing populism and unleashing the police for both like there was like one point that was about muggers and rapists and violent criminals, and then there's one that would like get all the bums and vagrants off the streets too. So people started talking about that. You got into it with some people, including Dave Smith, which led to a little bit of blowout there. Which it's always like Liberty Twitter is so frustrating because like I'm friends with so many people, and then it's like people will start fighting each other, and I'm just like, no, I love you both. Please stop. Please stop. And so like it was like, but although you made a really funny joke though when Dave blocked you, you were like, I guess I was part of the problem, which was so
problem,
right. Which is like, it's unfortunate. I mean, I love Dave. Dave is one of the ones that actually helped get me into libertarianism when I was on the left. And he's good on a lot of issues. I understand where he's coming from on this one, and so there's like I share your perspective more on this issue, although I understand where Dave is coming from. I do think, and I talked about this on a podcast I did on Sunday night on the We Are Libertarians network. I was like, this is definitely an issue that is harder to persuade people. Like this is not an issue that I would maybe choose as the first one to talk to like my normie status friends about. It's like, if you don't understand the problem with the police, and you don't understand the problems with central planning, and you don't understand libertarian principles, the hill to die on might not be we need to let in areas like LA where there's a lot of homeless people who are doing various things, a lot of them using drugs, leaving needles around, creating very unsafe, uneasy, potentially hazardous environments in areas that are meant for kids. It might be hard to win that battle, as opposed to other battles that are maybe less emotionally charged and that people might be more amenable to. So and Dave was kind of like making 2 points, and one of them was sort of that, which is like, oh, this is where libertarians lose people, because if you're going to die on this hill, people aren't going to listen to our ideas. And it's like, well, maybe I'm certainly someone for being strategic and a little bit pragmatic in like when we're talking to people who don't share our ideals. There's a time and place for maybe like dying on that hill and sticking to our principles. But like on one-on-one conversations with like, especially like if I lived in an area with that issue and I had neighbors and stuff and they were talking to me about that, I might not pick that moment to, explain why, that issue is. It's like there's a lot of, I think, easier ways to uh better topics to pick if you're going to talk to people about the problem with the police and the problem with using the state to solve a problem. That's one where I think people are going to be emotionally walled off to your explanation, even if you're correct. And so it can be, uh, but you got every situation's different. So you kind of have to play it by ear. But I do think where I agree with you and wanted to get into this a bit more. Um, I think the problem is, and I'm going to get your response to this. Dave, I think that the error Dave is making, and I tried to challenge him on this, and he said, "No, I don't think this is the case." But according to my math, I think it is. I think in the areas where homelessness is a problem, and we have to start there, I think, because like it's not a problem in every county or in every state. Like where I live, we don't have a homelessness problem. I can't recall ever seeing a homeless person at any of our public parks. So this is basically a non-issue. We're talking about like maybe a couple dozen states, and specifically, I think, a handful of counties and cities where this is a huge problem. So it is not like this widespread all over the
Yeah.
all over the country. This problem exists equally. It's hyper concentrated in specific areas. Um, in the areas where this is a problem, I don't think that even if you were going to like, it'd be one thing if you said, "Oh, all we have to do is send like a cop or two, and they don't have to do anything. They just show up and the homeless people leave." It's like, okay, well, in that hypothetical situation, maybe I just wouldn't care. But when we're talking about, let's say, L.A. County, which is the county I've been deriving my math from because it's the easiest example, we're talking about at least 70,000 homeless, and those are, I think, conservative statistics, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah, but using raw kind of like lowball numbers, we're talking about like 70,000 plus homeless people in a I forget how big LA County is. It's like between 5 and 10 square or between I forget. I should have had I had this stuff written down for the
Yeah.
Sunday podcast. Now I'm going off
Very big
memory.
population
It,
county in terms of the
yeah,
population. Mhm.
yeah, but it's a big county. It's a lot of people. It's got like at least 70,000 homeless, and there's only about like 10,000 active, just like on patrol, on duty cops. Then if you add, and then like if you want to add sheriffs and other levels of law enforcement that typically aren't going to be your on duty driving around in the cop cars, people, like we could double that and say like it's about 20,000. Okay, like so the problem is like we're talking about like even if all the cops were supposed to do is keep the homeless people out of parks, there's like, the homeless people outnumber the cops by a significant factor.
Right.
And the truth is, well, we know that the police are not going to just focus on this one issue. They're also doing a lot of other things, a lot of which we all agree are bad.
Right.
So we're talking about then, and this is why socialized security sucks, because it'll get weaponized in ways you don't want it to be, and it's a very inefficient distribution of resources. And so yeah, you're talking about a small if so inevitably, if you made a major plea, we need to solve this homelessness problem by invoking the power of the state or county police, they're going to go up. We need more funding. We need more personnel. We're probably going to need more SWAT teams. We're going to need more, more tear gas. More. We're going to have to. We're probably going to have to install permanent, on-site facilities and maybe perimeters and stuff. And it's like, I don't feel comfortable with that. Especially after 2 years of lockdowns where people are being arrested for leaving their houses and people arrested for taking their kids to parks
Yeah.
just to play, and looking at what's going on in Australia. It's like, maybe this is not a good time. I mean, there's never a good time, but maybe this is an especially bad time to be proposing ideas that would be easily weaponized by the state to increase the size and the scope of power of the police. So that's my thoughts. If you want to go ahead, respond to that, and give your thoughts too, we can get into this more.
Sure. So I think when it comes to the discussion about parks and the homeless and the like, I think it's just really important to contextualize it all uh, in reality instead of abstractions. Because a lot of times when people talk about issues, they get into policy fantasy where they're saying this is how it could be or this is how it should be, and they don't really actually have any power to do that. You know what I mean? It's not in their control, right? You can sit there and say, "Man, I wish the police would just not hurt anybody for victimless crimes. Wouldn't that be great?" But you don't have control over the police. You know, you're not the sheriff, you're not the police chief, you're not the mayor, you're not one of the city council members who like knows everybody and can get bills passed or whatever. So a lot of this stuff is really just political fantasy that doesn't actually apply to most people who just are like, what's in my power and what can I change? And for me, when I responded to him initially, my focus was on privatization, the concept, and choosing alternatives. And the reason why I talk about these things is that choosing alternatives is something within someone's control, right? You don't have to pass a bill. You don't have to lobby. You don't have to, slush fund some politician's campaign in order to say, I'm going to go somewhere else. Right? That's 100% right now in your zone. You could say, I'm going to go somewhere else. I'm going to choose to spend my time and resources in a place that is less sketchy, whether it's a friend's backyard. You go to a friend who has an apartment complex with a playground. You go to a private park. You go to Chuck E. Cheese. You go to just something else. Like basically, that's what it boils down to. Is you can choose that. That's in your control. And you get the usual like, oh, well, someone's too poor, they can't afford. It's like, oh, that's nonsense because if you're too poor, then you have serious other issues to work on, right? Whether you go to public park, if you can't afford to like, oh, I can't take my kid, down the street to Chuck E. Cheese. Well, you probably have serious structural financial issues, home life issues that way more need to be dealt with than whether or not you get to go to a public park versus going to your neighbor's dead end and play stickball or basketball or tag. So to me, this that stuff's kind of just silly. Really, it really is a silly thing to not just recognize. Oh yeah, that's in my control. I can choose that, right? You don't have to ask permission to choose differently. Now, when it comes to the privatization thing, they try to say, well, is that not feasible? Is that less practical? And I sit here and laugh because they're like, oh, we'll just abolish qualified immunity, which is a Supreme Court set standard, right? This is not the federal government that passed the law. It is not a state government passed the law. The Supreme Court of the United States created out of judicial fiat. So it ain't going anywhere anytime soon unless the Supreme Court overturns itself, which they started to do a little bit in a recent case that, I could talk at length about is, a jail cell issue, but it's not going anywhere. So people talk about practicality. As a lawyer, I chuckle because these are the kind of things that, you hear people saying, you're like, and I'm just like, yeah, this is how come attorneys still get lots of money because you have no idea what you're talking about. Right. When it comes to these kind of issues, it's like, yeah, you want to talk about practicality. That's not changing unless you get a Supreme Court case going up. So when I talk about privatization, there's a real thing. And actually, John Stossel, I don't know if you saw the video today, but he just released a video, private versus public parks today. He did a whole special talking about how Bryant Park is privately managed in New York City and how everybody wants to go there because back in the 80s, this philanthropist guy was like, hey, New York City, I want to run this privately. I'm going to make this amazing. And he used monies from private persons, no taxpayer money, nothing, to help renovate the park, bring in businesses, make it profitable, and make everything beautified because it incentivized people keeping it clean. And he came up with creative ways to like really make you want to keep it clean by having like new trash cans and keeping the bathrooms like clean 30 times a day, having private security guards. Ooh, private security is so boogeyman, like that can't exist, right? Private security guards actually helping to patrol and keep things, but without escalating violence. And they said that, sometimes they get homeless people, but they said if the homeless people are otherwise respectful, not causing disturbance, they don't care. They said sometimes they get some cracked out people. And you know what they do? They go up to them, they say, hey, you got to go. You know what I mean? If they're bothering someone or doing something, this is real. Like, this is not like some fantasy, imaginary thing. This is a real thing to move toward privatization. And as much as school choice is a real thing, it's something you can actually advocate for, whether it's a gradualism of private management or you move to, selling, auctioning off or something of that nature, divesting it and having it become, privatized and people getting, restitution in monies from an auction or whatever. So to me, I'm just sitting here like, this is stuff that you can go Google on Mises Institute. Like I was posting up stuff like I'm not like, just shooting the whatever. I'm literally posting Mises content on private parks and how to desocialize the commons, like foundational stuff 101. This is not controversial in the Austrian school of thought or in the libertarian school of thought. And it's like, oh my God, that's not practical. Like, it's so practical. It literally is something you can advocate now. Now, in the reality of what you can do if you're doing political stuff, I mean, you have the option to run for office. You can lobby. You can try to get a ballot initiative. You can do all kinds of things. If you don't like the political stuff, work together to open up a community park, right? You can have a corporation, for profit or not for profit, buy the land, turn it into something that people want to use. That's very real world and practical. And people do that all the time because they build amusement centers for people, or they build, shopping malls that have beautiful atriums, or they have really nice, playgrounds for kids that you can play at while you go shop. So to me, this is all something that should be normal if you're, somewhat out in the world, like you actually go to parks and you go out to shopping malls and stuff on a semi-regular basis. But maybe if you've been locked down in New York for a long time and don't know what that's like, and all you see are homeless people and, Cuomo, raping everybody. I guess you might miss that. But to me, it's something that needs to be demonstrated to people so that they actually have a concrete example of this. And I think John Stossel's video, I swear I didn't call him up and, say, hey, make this video. He just happened to release it. And it's one of those powerful narratives to help people say, oh, okay, there is a reasonable way to do this, where we can have amazing parks that people enjoy. And there's, market incentives for people to provide food to people and to have amazing, classes and stuff, and outdoor yoga and Zoom and all this stuff. So, it's not something that is impractical or just not possible. It just takes some work. It takes some creativity, but it's not something that is, out of touch. And the thing that bothers, me the most in terms of the principles you're talking about with there just being a sheer, huge number of homeless, is that even in Rothbard's 1992 piece, there is no and then what, right? Rothbard was so tired of everything in his old life. He's becoming a grumpy old man, just just get rid of these, annoying people in the street. He didn't even bother to say the end what. He literally said, I don't care what happens in the consequences. Okay, so this is one of the, greatest thinkers, in the 20th century, and all of a sudden, 1992, he's like, I don't care what happens next. And this guy wrote volumes on all kinds of other stuff. So it was, to me, it was very weak thinking. It was very expedient, cutting corners philosophically for the sake of an expedient end. And I think that was not good, for a capstone to his later years in his work. But I think that it's something that needs to be overcome through helping people see what the alternatives are, showcasing what it is, just like in any other type of endeavor, where the government's monopolized something. When it comes to the post office, you're like, how could you have posts? And you have FedEx, you have DHL, you have UPS. In many other countries today, they don't have a monopolized post office. They have competition, right? Even the Chinese government doesn't have a monopolized post office. They have a post office, but it's not monopolized. So people don't typically use it. They use a private service. So it's just a matter of saying, hey, hold on, chill out on trying to rely on the state first. Ask yourself first, okay, is there something I can do without doing that both is empathetic toward people in the situation, right? Because obviously people are concerned. That it's a concerning thing when you have people pooping in the street and whatever and stabbing themselves and wonder if they're going to attack you. I've seen it firsthand. I've seen the homeless in DC. I've seen the homeless in Seattle. I've seen the homeless in LA myself firsthand. I've been to all these places and I've experienced the homelessness up close. I've seen it myself. I walked through it. So I get it. It's unpleasant. And it can be concerning. But in order to fix that, you can't rely on the institution that caused all this.
Created the problem in the first place. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
They want this. The Democrats in these cities love it because they have a certain select number of crony, not-for-profit corporations that have a kickback cycle. So they fund these guys to get their tax write-offs, and they get them to say to all their, charitable donors, hey, vote for this guy, right? And it's this vicious cycle of all this money being pooled into their select crony benefactors. Doesn't really matter what the exact outcome is. In fact, to not even have a good outcome, or to fully clean it is the best, because then they have something more to still do. So they keep doing the circle, never filling the problems because they don't want to. That's the whole point. They need their reason for existence. They need the problem that they can constantly solve. They need the boogeyman. So, I can get into a whole bunch more other stuff, like in the comparisons of, comparing this to the C word in that language, or just silly things. Like I think about how, outside dogs might poop on my sidewalk, like a coyote pooped on my sidewalk. Well, I have to clean that up, right? I have to take personal responsibility. If a bird poops in my car, it's not a homeless person, but I don't have control over that. And I can't call the police to say, hey, go arrest that raven. It pooped on my car. I got to go run it through through the wash. You know what I mean? So there's times that
birds aren't real anyway, so I mean,
right. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, it's one of those things that to me is like, yeah, it seems like a big problem in the moment, it can be frustrating, but you got to take the emotions aside for a moment and say, okay, it is uncomfortable, but how do we fix this without increasing the violence of the state, without increasing dependency on the state, and worst of all, in my opinion, without making it seem like government is the ethical solution, because that's the biggest danger. And
yeah, it is.
across the world, governments use public works projects as their selling point to say, see, we care about you. We provided you with this, like, in North Korea, they have a ski resort that they use for international tourists. It looks like it's from like 1980. And all the people there literally like crying, like, oh my God, Kim Jong-un, he's so great. He gave us a ski resort. We'd have nothing without him. Oh my. And you watch it and you're like, holy crap, these are brainwashed. But Americans are just as brainwashed as the North Koreans, because they're like, yes, oh my God, my roads. Without the government, we wouldn't have any of this stuff. But that's how it works. They obfuscate by monopolizing. And when you excuse it, you don't give an opportunity for market alternatives to show, hey, this is a lot better than what the government's trying to offer you. So, that gets lost sometimes in the emotion of it, but I just cannot emphasize how important it is for cultural change and for getting people to get out of that cycle of statism.
Yeah, no, I agree with a lot of that there. I think, Rothbard's allowed to be wrong. I think a lot of the people that were quoting that Rothbard quote, and then people be like, and listen, like, I mean, I'm a Rothbardian. I mean, I love Rothbard. There's not, I think, as you said, one of the most brilliant thinkers and libertarian contributors of all time. But he's had some mistakes in his thinking, in his writings. A lot of the people that are like pushing his point here about unleashing the police in 1992 wouldn't agree with his take on children and the relationship between parents and children. And the idea that parents own their children, but and also don't have any incentive, don't have any what he said. They don't have any like like there's how did he put it? Like, parents are not required to take care of their children, I think was like the point he made. That was like, you can't force a parent to take care of their children, basically. And it's their right to, like, well, parents shouldn't harm their kids, but they're also like could abandon them, and that would be at least like okay in a libertarian sense. I might be oversimplifying what he said, but it was something along those lines. But it was very it was a very brutalist take he had on the relationship between parents and children, and what the rights of children were, and comparing them to property, which, like, on one hand, yeah, like, the children are mine in a sense that, like, it's sort of like, it's immoral for someone to take my children from me, but to call them property is just I don't know, too clumsy of a word, and it can lead to some very serious errors. So people will point that out very often as like an area where they disagree with Rothbard, and I disagree with him there, and I also disagree with him on this one. Again, in conversations with people, sometimes you make concessions, right? And it's like sometimes with someone you go, like, they're not ready to go, oh, we need to just completely privatize the police, and the police are of zero value to society. So you give them something. You go, okay, you know what? We need police for someone breaks into your house, or if there's riots in the street and they're burning down, people's businesses and stuff, or for, people pooping and dropping needles in parks. You give them that, and then focus on, like, okay, but here's all the ways that police are a problem, and you focus on those things first, or you focus on other areas where, because, like, sometimes it's like when you're trying to persuade people over time, there's this negotiation, or at least that's what some people, I think, are just always going to have to proclaim what is true. And then there's those of us, and I do a lot of this, where it's like you meet people where they're at and you make concessions with them, but try to push them that, like, one step closer every conversation, to challenge, like, if you try to get people to take the red pill all at once, not everybody's going to do that. Sometimes you need to, smash the pill up, and, every time you see them, it's like a little, like, you're just diluting their drink a little bit with just a little bit of that red pill, just to push them along the way into opening their eyes over time. But yeah, I agree with pretty much everything you said there. And to be fair, Dave was saying, well, we should do both. We should, use the police in the here and now, but we should also, of course, push privatization as the true long-term solution. And it's like, I want to be fair to him. Like he was saying privatization is the answer, and free market alternatives are good solutions that we can give. I think the problem is if we spend too much time, like time is a scarce resource, right? And energy is a scarce resource. Um, the less we put into promoting privatization, and the more we put into propping up why the state is necessary or why police are necessary, we're just hurting our efforts to wake people up and deprogram them and make the world more free. And one of the things I love about Dave is he's in the business of waking people up, and he's very good at it. As somebody who's been woken woken up by Dave Smith, I can say, he's very efficient at it. And I get you want to meet people where they're at and be empathetic, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think it is um a lot better to focus on the ways where we can solve this problem without increasing the police. Someone made a comment that Austin, Texas didn't need any of what I was talking about earlier, like increasing the police to reinstate the camping ban. I looked it up very quickly. The current homeless population in Austin, Texas is like a little over 2,000. It's gone up a little bit from 2015 when it was like around 1,000. So I don't know. I mean, that kind of pales in comparison to the numbers in LA. So I mean, again, if it's a small, to me, I would wonder how much of a problem it was in Austin with those numbers compared to other places. Your mileage will vary. Just like a broken clock is right twice a day. Occasionally, the state will do something maybe like semi effectively, but that doesn't mean that's what we should prop up and normalize as what our ideal solutions are. And um, I think the more that we can show people, like this is an easy way, I think, that we can show people how free markets work. There's a lot of areas where the state creates problems, and maybe it's not as easy to create free market solutions. But this one I think is pretty, like, it's not hard to uh in my county alone, which is not like a huge city, so I'm sure there's more options in cities and stuff. There are so many private alternatives to parks. We have like indoor like uh playgrounds that are like set up, like they have like those big bouncy houses, and they have trampolines, and it's like and it's almost like a free to use, not free to use, but like a free roam, like mini gymnastics kind of setup, where kids can run around and play and
Parkour,
stuff like
if
that.
you run.
Yeah, a little bit like that, but kinda geared towards, like, younger kids, not extreme stuff. Although,
Mm,
like, they have a section for like, they have, like a warped wall, kinda like Ninja
mm,
Warrior kinda section too, which is cool. So,
mm.
but and that's cheap. It's like you can take I'll take all 3 of my kids there for, like, I think $8 a visit, which is like, again, like, not hateful to take 3 kids there for $8.
Right.
Um, uh, it's been worse because of COVID, because before you could go and just spend as long as you want there, and now it's like, oh, you can only spend 2 hours, and they're limited hours. So, there's some problems there
Right.
just because 'cause they're bowing to the regime, but it's still a great alternative. There's also, a place near us that's like it's called Tiny Town, and it's like this indoor, like, pretend city, that, like, people go, and there's, like, a pretend doctor's office, a pretend
Mm,
grocery store, pretend houses, and then there's, like, a little playground area with slides and stuff, and, there are McDonald's and fast food restaurants that have
right.
parks in them that are free, playgrounds in them that are free to use. There's so many options out there, and, uh yeah, trying to rely on the state to solve the problem, like, in the areas where it's a problem, it's caused by the state, you know what I mean? The homeless
Right.
problem. Um, so, I just think this is such a great opportunity in these areas to be like, yeah, it sucks that the state is, causing this problem, and it sucks that you can't take your kids to this park, and, look at all these free market alternatives that are, like, way better. I mean, just in my area alone, where again we don't suffer from maybe as much of the damage from the state as maybe in places where local municipalities and state governments are larger. Our public parks kind of suck.
Mhm.
They're not well up kept. They're always dirty. The equipment's really outdated. A lot of it sometimes is like borderline unsafe. Last public park I took my kid to, the swing set, when we started to swing on it, like the back pole was starting to like uplift out of the ground.
Oh, no.
And so it's like they don't upkeep these things. If something happens on them, like some kind of altercation, there's not a really good resolution for that. So, yeah, it's just I even without a homeless problem in my area, I don't like taking my kids to public parks. So and I'm not rich, you know what I mean? Like, I'm middle class, I guess, so I'm comfortable, but I'm not like rolling in the dough. These places that I take my kids to are not they're not high end Gucci places that only the rich elite can take their kids to.
Yeah. Not Mar-a-Lago you're going to.
Right. So yeah, I don't know. Like I think it's one of those things where I want to get your thoughts on this. Like I feel like sometimes libertarians we're so isolated and we're always in like we spend so much of our mental energy in opposition that I think some people, especially people that have been at it for a long time, guys like Dave have been at it for a lot longer than I have. It can be easy, I think, to just be like mental fatigue, to be like, I just, uh, am I really gonna like? It's like maybe some kind of subconscious thing where you're like, oh, am I gonna say the state? It's always the state's the problem, and the state is never the solution. And so they try to find ways, I think, and it's almost like you're attempting to maybe appear reasonable
Mm,
to non-libertarians, or you're just tired of always being contrarian, and so you pick something that you think, oh well, here's an area where I would use the state, just and it's like, you know what I mean? Like maybe that's part of it, or,
mhm,
or something. Um, I've caught myself going that way a few times. One of my biggest pet peeves is old people driving cars.
mm,
I have been in 3 auto accidents in the
mhm.
past, 6 years, all when I was driving with my wife, and, like, 2 out of the 3 times she was pregnant.
Wow.
All 3 of those times, we were hit by somebody who, like, should not have been driving. Like, they were so old that and their senses so dulled. One of them literally hit us 3 times. Like, they hit us, and then, like, we started to, like, "Okay, they hit us, we're gonna pull over."
Uh,
They drove and hit us again as we were pulling over to the side, and she got out and she went, "I kept trying to drive forward, and I didn't understand why my car wasn't moving."
Oh my gosh. Wow.
So sometimes I'm like, we can't just have like, we need more. Sometimes I've like in my frustration be like, we need more restrictions on people driving, and we should have mandatory tests when people hit 55 and then 65 and stuff to make sure they're still competent to drive. And
Yeah.
on one hand, I actually think free market regulation would maybe have something like this, like a better way to for people to demonstrate they're competent on roads, especially because
Mhm.
privatization would create more incentives for the owners of those roads to maybe
Yeah.
like make sure there's not like major hazardous risks caused by people who don't have any business driving on them. I mean, it might vary by area, but I could see potential uh, ways in which the market might produce that. But I'll get so like especially when like I've been in 3 accidents and in a short period of time, and I have young kids and stuff. I'm like, the state needs to crack down on this. So like, what I mean, that's an area where like I've been, you know, uh,
Hmm.
a little bit too quick to maybe want state intervention. But I know that the state would screw that up.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
That would end up being like an extreme invasion of privacy. It's like, oh, you're 55, your senses have dulled, and if they can say that for your ability to drive, it's like, oh, well, you're 55. Should you really have the ability to carry firearms anymore? Like
Right.
at your age, is it really safe? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, so there's so many ways that we don't realize that like we give the state an inch and it's a precedent for where they'll eventually take a mile.
Definitely. No, I completely agree. And I think just tying back to like the idea of like solutions outside the state and like, what would happen otherwise. I think one hang up that a lot of people have when it comes to these topics is that they've already channeled their idea of what should be based on what those in the government have set. And to tie that in specifically to topics we've been talking about, one example is just like the idea of using police. Like, why is it that police are the institution or entity that is even dealing with things that are not involving like something that's ethically criminal, like violating the body or property of another, theft, murder, rape, and so forth? Why are police dealing with traffic accidents? Why would police be dealing with homeless and stuff like that? Like, to me, it's like, why can't something be imagined that is not police in terms of solving the problems, like just something other than police, whatever it may be, whether it's private market or even the government? Just the idea that someone who doesn't have the force and power to make arrest deals with the situation, and instead of people who are charged with the ability to use deadly force and have qualified immunity, right? Like, even that just little, like, hey, maybe a different grouping of government workers should handle this, and not police, right? Just something like that is such a leap for people to be able to think about, because the government is so good at getting people to only imagine structures within what they predetermine. And that includes parks themselves, right? People often think like, hey, this is a park. And it's like, yeah, but why? The government told you it's a park. That could have been a shopping center. That could have been a preschool. That could have been, a clothing store. That could have been a rehab center. That could have been a car dealership. You don't know what else it could have been if people were actually able to choose in the market what was best. You assume it's a park because the government told you this is a park, right? So breaking through those types of psychologies that are forced onto people by the government is also just as important, because we understand the idea that government hides the economics of the unseen and the opportunity costs with forcing a choice, where they take your money and choose what the solution is. And then people, of course, then fight over what the government's doing, right? Because that's what the government wants, right? Oh, I'm going to vote for this politician because they said they're going to have, cheese stands at the parks. I'm going to vote for this politician because they said they're going to put a swimming pool at this park. And you're just battling each other over this, scarce resource that's being told it's public, you own it. And it's a total lie. And it's meant to always get people fighting and angry at each other instead of like, wait a second, this needs to end. Like, the government should not be setting up these false constructs for people to fight each other instead of pointing out the thieves that are taking your money to force you into this artificial fight. So, I think getting out of those psychologies that is forced onto us by the government is just so critical as a first step to helping people exit the paradigm that, okay, this is the only way things can be done. This is the only way that you could have these things provided. Otherwise, it's just chaos and anarchy. So it's just one of those ideas that you have to sit down, talk with someone, and be able to show the alternatives and get them to think, hey, what could be possible? And I do that all the time when it comes to different jurisdictions, whether it's states, United States, or other countries where there's differences in legislative schemes, whether it's saying, hey, homeschooling is illegal in this country, like Germany, but it's not illegal in this state where you don't even have to register the government to say you're homeschooling, right? What's the difference? How do they fare, the families and stuff like that? Are they all just the homeschooling families, just like all strung out and like poor? No, like, it's just, so you have to be able to bring in that reality, because the government wants to obfuscate reality. And the more the government gets to obfuscate reality, the easier it is for them to sell themselves as the savior, because they have the Hegelian dialectic, problem, reaction, solution. They create the problem, right? They get a reaction from people, and then, ooh, we're going to have a solution. Oh, and conveniently, the government gets more power and we get to control you more. How did, so surprising. How'd that work out, right? So,
Yeah.
just not buying into that cycle is just such a big thing. And I think that's why it's so important to do that, even with people, as you said before, normies who are like, oh my gosh, like privatization, this, but it's like, you got to explain through example and talk to them about real world examples, bring it to the table and say, hey, have you heard of Bryant Park in New York City? Let me tell you a story, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Or it's like, you don't even pick an argument with them. Just be like, "Oh yeah, it sucks that these parks have these problems," and just focus on, like, don't even argue with them. Just
Right.
demonstrate to them, like, "Hey, you want to come with me? My family and I are going to this, private indoor park next week. Come with us. It's a lot better." You know what I mean?
Right.
And then people just kind of like, you don't even have to argue with them. They'll just go, "Oh wow, public parks suck, but these private
Right.
ones are great." and then that just you don't even have to argue with them. They just get into that mindset. One area where I feel like there's a kind of an exception, although I just avoid the problem entirely by homeschooling my kids. But insofar as kids are sort of forced into public schools, and like you can homeschool them, but that is harder for like it's easy to avoid public parks. It's a lot harder for everybody. Not everyone's in the same financial situation where
Mhm.
they're able to homeschool their children. And,
Right.
and I'm sympathetic to that. Insofar as kids are forced into public schools, I do feel like okay, like maybe there's more of an argument there. Although schools typically hire private security and stuff also too. So I prefer the state to hire and the public schools to hire private security than to have on duty cops. I know my school had on duty cops, but they were worthless. Our we actually had an incident in our school once, and the cop was worthless because he was so
Mm.
fat he couldn't chase after and stop the incident from happening. So
Right.
so socialism always creates inefficiencies, and sometimes
Right.
that's in the allocation of resources, and sometimes that's just you know the resource itself just sucks.
Right.
An overweight cop that can't run more than 10 feet without losing his breath isn't very helpful.
Right.
Um, but so if there's an area where the state forces you to be there, maybe it's somewhat fair to say, yeah, the state should, make that environment safe, especially if it's an environment where kids are going to be. And again, it's like I'm sympathetic to, like, I have kids, and if I lived in areas where you know uh, these issues were more prevalent, um, I'm sure that I might be even more sympathetic. But yeah, I mean, prevention is better than cure. Public schools are just such a mess that it's like every possibility that you can explore to not put your kids in there, you need to explore. Is my ideal solution to that. But I get that it's tough for everybody to do so, but that's why, I don't know. I almost wish, and maybe something exists that I'm not aware of, but that, maybe libertarians need to do a better job at like crowdsourcing funds and resources for parents to make it easier for them to homeschool their kids.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Like there's ways to do it without having to invest a lot of money or necessarily a lot of time. It's not necessarily it's not like you have to sit there for 8 hours a day and teach your kids. I've started to homeschool my kids now. My oldest is 6, and a lot of it is pretty hands off. Um, but it's tough. I mean, everyone's in different situations, especially if you're a single parent. I know that's even tougher. So there's not always perfect solutions, but yeah. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. So I like talking about the public school example for a lot of reasons because public schools, right, is a great example of security theater with the reality of government brainwashing. And I think about the safety and security and what happens now in reality, right? The government says, oh, safety and security. We'll put up a gun free sign. And just recently, there was the Oxford shooting, and a 15-year-old shot and killed 4 students and injured a bunch of others, right? So when you go to public schools as it is now, the government makes them giant targets. They disarm the people there, leave them wide open to be attacked, by, anybody who wants to come by because nobody there has the means to defend themselves. And then at places where they try to beat up the security, as you notice with, SROs, student resource officers, you come into the 2 most common problems, which is one, they're incompetent, like you just mentioned, the guy who couldn't chase down people, or at a worst case scenario, look at the shooting down at Parkland, where the officers just ran away and sat outside while crews murdered a bunch of people, right? What good was that, right? They just sat outside. And then when the parents sued the police department, the courts ruled, oh, well, they don't
It
have the
wasn't their
ability to protect you.
right. They said it wasn't their job.
Doesn't their job. Isn't that funny how that works? Government secure their version of security is
Right.
put a cop there who now what do cops actually do more realistically when it comes to students? The whole school to prison pipeline. When police are there, you're going to have more likely of a chance that a student is arrested for what should be a teachable thing. In other words, it should be something that doesn't lead to arrest, but it's something, obviously something that might need discipline for an independent harm. Again, not tied to like not doing homework. So I'm saying like when it comes to someone hurting somebody else, this, that, the police presence guarantees that children are now getting records and criminal records. And I've seen this because I've been a criminal defense attorney for juveniles. So I know this firsthand and I've seen it firsthand. I've actually worked with kids who have been arrested at schools and at secondary, you could say second chance schools, and in juvenile detention halls where they actually have school. They're all in orange jumpsuits, which I've seen that also firsthand. So when it comes to the nature of school, you're not sending your kids to a safe place in the first place. You're actually putting them in danger. So you can't really make something more safe that the government is intentionally making not only unsafe, absolutely unsafe when it comes to, the actual attacks and coming from the outside, but on the inside as well, when it comes to bullying and when it comes to how issues are handled. So then we can get into the idea of what the nature of schooling does, which I'm sure, as you know quite well, that's just one giant socialist indoctrination program. Yes. And not to mention the bullying and the shame from teachers and forcible grading. And what takes place is, kids' creativity is eroded and they're shamed out of, coming up with their own initiative because they just have to follow what it is and obey and obey and obey so they can get good grades, or they're not going to be good enough to get into honors. They're not going to get to be able to play sports. They're not going to be able to be looked at as, oh, they're one of the smart kids. And I've watched this because I've been a public school teacher at an 8A high school and at a charter school K to 8. And I've also been a substitute teacher at a bunch of different schools. My dad was a 30-year school teacher, actually an inner city school teacher as well. And I've been to that school when I was younger as well. So I've seen this on a wide diversity of cases in terms of like being firsthand in the situation. And the fundamental problem is that it's just an absolutely unsafe place to send a child. Like, you cannot fix a socialist brainwashing president and make it more safe. You're lipsticking a pig, right? Oh, they're a little like, no, you know what I mean? And then you have what's even more crazy, right? Which you know very well of, when you have literal communist Antifa teachers coming in, like actual commies saying, yes, we're going to come in and indoctrinate your kids. And they're trying to bring in CRT, right, to create, race class division stuff. I mean, it's just like, whoa, hello. This is not a place you want to send your kids under any circumstances. And I guess, again, I understand that for some people, they're in a rock and a hard place because of finances and stuff. I totally get that. It's not, it's not that I don't understand that, but I can't downplay the very real reality that sending a kid there is a sentence of trauma, abuse, lifetime shame, and dysfunction that will last for the rest of their lives. Like, you are hurting them by sending them there, whether you realize it or not. And it's really, painful that so many people have had to face that choice. The government has made it so difficult for people to afford things with the inflation and with property taxes and, taking your school money, whether you go to school or not. And, literally wasting everything on wars, on wars and drugs, everything. It's just, it's maddening. And it should be that level of, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. But unfortunately, some people just want the Band-Aid. They want we got to beautify the park a little bit. We got to, at least maybe CRT not always taught in schools. Like, it's just silly. It's like, you need to get your kids out of there so that they actually have a future, because whoever's left in there is, if they don't get fully brainwashed, they're going to be extremely traumatized. And if they're brainwashed, they'll be traumatized and brainwashed. So it's like, it really is tragic, and it makes me mad. But that's how come I'm so passionate about it, and that's how come I take an active role of helping parents get out of there. And I do that actively. All the time. I literally, through what I do with honest teachers, stuff like that, I talk to families. I connect them with Homeschool Defense League. I give them the resources for unschooling. I show them how to do Sudbury Valley schools or Sudbury schools or umbrella schools and things like that. I try to help parents have resources that they can feel comfortable to make their way out. It takes time. And teachers too. I help people who are in there and they said, I left because I could, you're right, I can't keep doing this. And I just try to encourage people and say, hey, I get it. It's tough. But the only way you're getting out is if you start saying, okay, I have to get serious about this and actually make a plan of action to get out. Otherwise, you're going to keep making excuses and just pushing it off until you say, okay, you know what? This is not right. I need to get out and start planning an exit. You're not going to make it. And so that's why, I don't dance around those kinds of issues and say, yeah, the whole, I'm worried about a crackhead, in school, like making their way in. I'm like, I don't care. Like, this place is unsafe. You know what I mean? They're more likely to get shot up by some mass shooter than, some crackhead coming on in and like, stabbing them with, a needle or something. It's just that, ridiculous. So, the more shocking I think that sometimes you are when it comes to communicating these principles, like again, radical principles, the more people have that trauma, that's kept their walls up, get shocked enough to where they like start to unravel it a bit, right? Because again, if you're so used to just the same old, status brainwashing the media, you can kind of brush off, halfway takes that you might get in the mainstream. But when you get taxation is theft, public school is prison, abolish the ATF, right? And you're like, whoa, okay, where's this coming from, right? You can't unsee that. It suddenly is a thought process that you have to then challenge in yourself and say, well, wait, why? No, that's not right. And then think about it, right? You wouldn't get that otherwise. In school, they're like, hey, if you were president one day, how would you control the economy? All right, write a 5-paragraph paper and make sure you have a good conclusion that restates your thesis about how you'd be the best president ever. I mean, it's so crazy. I'm there. I live it. I still do. I own a tutoring company. I still see this stuff going on. So, it's something that it's irredeemable and it has to be dealt with irreverently for people to get it.
Yeah, like I said, maybe the solution is we need, and I know I'm not saying there aren't people out there doing it, but we need. I think we need. This is an area where we need more people getting involved to provide more resources, more aid, more maybe homeschooling groups in local areas and stuff. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely. Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I'm sympathetic again to the people that are in situations that they're between a rock and a hard place, but reach out for help. There are people that are willing to help you if you're in that rock and hard place. I would, heck, if you're listening to this right now and you're having a hard time, like, financially or with time, it's like, I can't give much, but I'll contribute, 30 bucks a month towards whatever, you need to help make it easier for you to, to do it. Or if you want the Ron Paul homeschool curriculum, I'll try to hook you up with that. You know what I mean? Which is a great resource to help take things off your back. It's like, I would rather, you know what I mean? Like if your problem is money, your problem is time, like reach out to people and ask for help. Because nobody wants to see like, uh, your children being put in that situation. Like I don't want to see people putting their kids through public schools, and I try not to shame people about it because I don't think it's the right approach. I think we just need to offer help and say, listen, like you don't have to do this. You might feel like this is your only option, but there's a whole there's hundreds, there's thousands of people in the liberty movement who are there ready to help you not push your kids through this mentally, sometimes even physically traumatic experience. I went through something where, I mean, my life could have ended up very differently. I got lucky. I got into a fight in high school, which I almost got arrested for. Didn't get arrested, but I did get charged, and but I was like a first time offender. So they put me through like one of these stupid first time offender remediation programs, and which as soon as I met a probation officer and they looked at my case, they were like, you don't belong here. Like, why are you here? Like, you're a waste of my time. Because I wasn't even in a fight that I picked. Like, not really. Like, the story is, there was a guy who pushed down a girl who was in my school who had some kind of disability, and I don't really know what it was, but she's one of the students that had those poles attached to her arms to help her walk, and she had a teacher aide with her a lot, especially when she was younger. So she was always in my class, and I didn't really know her very well, but I saw her around just from being in the same schools for 10 plus years. And as she was in high school and stuff, she didn't need the teacher aide around all the time, but she still had a disability. And one day I'm walking to class and I feel something hit my leg. I what the heck? And I turn around, she's on the ground, and what happened? And she's in shock and crying. And then guy next to me goes this guy pushed her down.
Hmm.
I went up to him and I was like, "Did you push her down?" And he looked at me and laughed. and kept walking. So yeah, I implemented a little bit of street justice and grabbed him and went like, what the hell's your problem? And one thing led to another, and words were exchanged, and then his nose got broken somehow, and I won't say how it happened, but my knuckles hurt afterwards, and um, yeah.
Wow.
But it's like, he got detention for pushing the disabled girl on the ground. I got suspended for 2 months and put through this stupid remediation program.
Wow.
And yeah, it was just like, yeah,
That's
what
just such a quintessential example, though, there of exactly what to expect in that environment, which is that the people who actually stand up for others who are being abused, who are, in a tough situation themselves, they're the ones punished by the school
yeah,
to prison pipeline. But, the people who actually hurt others and are the bullies, right? They get passed over. This happens so much. I mean, time and again. The person who's a bully, they just move them around because they don't want to deal with the situation. So what? They just, move them school to school, move them class to class, whatever. And if you fight back, oh, well, now you're the one who gets in trouble. You're the one who,
I
gets in
was I was lucky that I had good grades and that I was a first time offender.
Yeah.
Like it was like, oh, you're an honor roll student, and so I think it was like, oh well, you're usually a good
Right.
subservient, mind puppet. So
Exactly.
this was just a glitch in the system, and you won't do it again.
You're a
Whereas,
great
like,
puppet.
right, yeah. Whereas if I had been a troublemaker with a
Right.
history, it'd be like, oh well, you need cracked out on.
Right.
So
And in all those cases, I'd say having, worked on this both, directly with students, in the teaching side and in the juvenile defense side, by and large, all these instances too, where someone is dysfunctional or violent, it's not coming out of nowhere. These are kids who are coming from broken homes. They're themselves
yeah,
facing abuse, neglect, starvation, and whatnot. School is not making that better. It doesn't change their home life. It doesn't help the parenting. It only adds on more stress to the kid who now, in addition to having a crappy home life, has to meet these progressions and meet these grade marks, or they're also a bad student and unworthy and remedial, right? Instead of actually fixing that. So it just adds on more stress and more opportunities to get into trouble while not actually fixing the thing that actually affects the rest of their performance in school. Not the performance in school is something to be admired here, but rather just that whole idea of, oh, you want them to do well and be a good student, but the things that are affecting them, the divorce, the parents being absent, possibly getting beat up on by siblings and things like that, seen it all, that's affecting them, but that's not being addressed.
I
And they're
feel like
getting graded just like the kid who has a two-parent household and they have lots of money and he has a great bed and they have great food and they have great times out and their parents are supportive. They're getting graded on the same thing.
yeah.
It's crazy. It's absolutely insane to me.
Well, I almost feel like there's like a comparison I'm thinking about in my head. It's like in the same way welfare programs have sort of like created this malincentive especially like in like communities like the Black community where you see incredibly high rates of like single motherhood, broken families, and stuff like that because there's incentives, financially they're acting upon you. I feel like public schools create an incentive structure that leads to more parents being uninvolved in their kids. You know
Yes.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it's like the state is taking that off your hands. It's
Right.
this weird like welfare of you having to raise your kids and and be a parent for
Mhm.
your kids. It's like, oh well, you don't have to raise your kid. Like you have to raise them just till they're 5. And then the state does it for you, and you're more of like oh, I feed them in the morning and
Mhm.
at dinner, and like I just babysit them on the weekends, and they go back to the where they spend most of their time. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? It's like it's I'm not saying that's how parents think about it, but
No, yeah.
that's kind of the incentive structure of it. So,
Some do. I mean,
I mean,
some
some
do.
do,
They're
yeah,
glad to be like, oh, get my little brat out of here. Take him.
right,
I've seen it.
yeah,
And it's sad.
100%,
It's really tragic. But all this, the whole system is built to ensure that everyone is stigmatized and segregated according to obedience, so that the most compliant and pliable make it to the top of the schooling system so that they can be selected for their compliant attributes, when they go to college or get jobs and stuff like that, or go to the government, right? And then those who are divergent, that is, they choose or for whatever reason, are not able to meet the demands, they are shamed and shunned, even if you have a very high IQ, right? So you can be very intelligent in terms of your natural like thinking speed, but if you're like, I'm not going to do the homework, you still get a C. You know what I mean? Doesn't matter, right? You don't turn your work. Oh, okay. So, it is purely about willingness and ability to comply with whatever a teacher dictates based on their terms. And in some cases, how much you can suck up, because everybody knows, there's some kids that they suck up to the right teacher and the teacher's a little more gracious, with, maybe bump that up. Okay. Or who can squeaky wheel the most, right? I've seen that too, right? You get a parent who's more involved with a kid and they squeaky wheel. They're like, no, come on, please, let me do lecture credit. Let me know. So
Yeah,
they don't
that's
have
so
that
true.
support. They don't make it
Well,
up.
and there's a correlation between this and the topic that we were talking about, which is like, public schools probably are a major contributor. Among many, there's many different reasons for homelessness, but public schools ill-equipping people for life at least plays
Mhm.
you know a major role in that equation. You know what I mean? Like if public school actually prepared you with the kind of skills to be competitive in the marketplace and to take care of yourself, there would at least be a decrease in the likelihood of people to become homeless. But
Mhm.
a lot of people, especially in the areas where you see this as a problem, what happens is like people leave public school, they aren't ready for life. They're convinced they need to go to college to be ready for life. So they go to a university, get into mountains of debt, get out of that, they're still not ready for life. They still don't have any kind of marketable skills or understanding of how to, you know, be an independent functioning human being. And they're in areas where they're very rent controlled, very, a lot of different zoning laws and stuff make and different things create a very high cost of living, but that's where they think they need to live because it's part of, oh, like, oh well, this is the safe place where everyone believes all the same things that I do, and everywhere else is filled with these filthy heathens that that are uh you know against the science, or they're fascists and Nazis and all this. And so they live in these areas. They and now it's like they're depressed. They get onto maybe some different, maybe doctors prescribe them medications, which then lead to them trying more non usually prescribed medications. They get addicted to different harder drugs. Like there's a lot of correlations and ways in which you can see these things playing into each other,
Mhm.
and they're all interconnected. But it's like
Mhm.
the the odds are, though, the more you rely on the state to keep your kids safe and uh, to give them a good life and to help them be successful in life, the odds are not in your favor that that's going to work out.
Right? Yeah, it's teaching them to, instead of think about things themselves and to conversate, which is a big, very important part of a young person developing their ability to think, is the ability to ask questions of others, think about what someone says, take it in, ask further questions, and reflect and go back and forth. The schooling paradigm largely erodes that, because a lot of it is authoritative person. Here's what you need to know. Shut up. You need to focus when I say it. That's the most important thing for your life right now. Don't question it. Don't bother me with saying, why can't we do something else? No, we're not going outside. Do this worksheet. We got, this much time before the state or the district test. And it's so sad. It's such a
You know
sad.
what's really sad is how much of like my older extended family, or just like sometimes like older people at church and stuff, think that my kids are rude. And I'm
Hmm.
I'm not saying that, like, they're not always the most gracious in their delivery, but the motivation behind my kids asking questions and not listening to things isn't, again, I'm not saying they're the most gracious. Sometimes there's a little bit of like maybe like a little bit of a I don't know, like a bit of a like rebellious attitude to them to some extent, but I think most of the time they're just like, questioning things, which
Right.
is natural, which is just like you have to beat that out of kids and
Yeah.
then they go through life just listening. But like when you
Right.
don't beat that out of kids, they're very inquisitive and they
Right.
want to know why,
Yeah.
things are happening. They want explanations for things.
Yeah.
And that's not them being rude most of the time, or a lot of times when I think kids are rude, it's because they've become very emotionally frustrated with the fact that they're not getting answers.
Hmm.
So it's like for a while, it's like genuine intellectual curiosity. When that need is not met and they're shamed and disciplined unfairly for
Mhm.
having that natural intellectual curiosity.
Right.
Eventually that turns into a bit of a defiant attitude where they're just like,
Mhm.
I'm not being given good reasons for why I need to do this. So, now my questions are coming with an anger and a rebelliousness out of it, which is, kind of natural.
Right.
You know what I mean? So like my kids don't like sometimes I've been told like, oh, your kids don't listen well. It's like my kids listen very well. They just don't blindly obey to everything, like, you know what I mean? Like, which
Right.
is now if it's an emergency, they will. Or like they can tell like if something's serious, they'll usually listen.
Mhm.
But if I ask them to do something or if I tell them not to do something and then my kid doesn't listen right away, but like, they're not throwing a fit or anything. If they just kind of like ask questions about why they shouldn't do something or why they should do something, and then sometimes I'll even go, "Hey, you know what? That's a good argument there. Maybe I was wrong to tell you to do that or not to do that." Like kids are not stupid. They sometimes have, sometimes I've caught myself just telling my kids to do something because that's just what I was told to do as a kid. And then
Mm.
when you take a step back to think, huh, there's really nothing wrong with what you're doing. So,
Right.
I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like a lot of times just kids are annoying to people,
Mhm.
because it's the mindset of a kid to sort of like push against barriers. But we live in
Right.
such a society where I think the problem is like we're all dealing with trauma
Mhm.
of statist indoctrination that's taught us not to be that way, and
Right.
so we don't want kids to be that way. But that's part of what makes them successful and intelligent, and people are it's just amazing to watch with my kids, people be simultaneously annoyed with my kids when they're, like, asking questions and not just, like, being good little obedient, like, jump, when I say jump, you say how high, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, my kids aren't like that, but my kids are incredibly intelligent. You know what I mean? Like, I don't even have to like, when it comes to homeschooling, I
Mhm.
don't even have to convince my oldest to do homeschooling. Like,
Hmm.
he wants to learn things.
Right.
He
Yeah.
chooses what he wants to learn. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? And it's just
Right.
like, you know what I mean? And I would tell you, like he's really interested in biology, and so like animals, taxonomy, how different animals do things, different processes and traits they have. He's really into dinosaurs.
Yeah.
Um, we went to a museum, like a state museum, where they had like dinosaur exhibits and animal exhibits and stuff. And at the dinosaur exhibit, he knew more than the actual museum worker there.
Wow.
Like, there was, like, like, he was like, "Do you know what this skeleton is?" And the museum curator was like, "Oh, I think that's a," and my son was like, "No, that's a Parasaurolophus." And he's like, "Is it?" And she's like, "Oh, you're right." And it's like it's
That's
like
too funny.
and
Right.
luckily, the museum worker was, like, very gracious about it, like, they
Good.
didn't get all defensive or anything,
Good.
which was good, but it's just
Yes.
kids are just sponges, and if you let
Yes.
them just, like, again, you provide a little bit of structure,
Mhm.
keep them safe, give but it's like, they just need a little bit of guidance
Mhm.
and to not, uh to not raise them with these abusive tendencies, whether it's spanking, whether it's public indoctrination from schools or whatever,
Mhm.
and they can really soar.
Right.
And so prevention is better than cure. We won't have a lot of homeless people in the streets if we just do a better job at raising the next generation.
Right. I mean, yeah, I mean, homelessness by and large, you know, is riddled with a history of trauma and abuse. There's almost always going to be some story of something that happened, usually early childhood, sometimes later in life if it's traumatic enough. It could be a divorce and a job loss at once, as Bob Murphy talked about. But yeah, I mean, getting to the root issues is so incredibly important. And to me, that is the greatest empathy you can have. Looking at the symptoms, sure, there's many discomforting symptoms that we have because of state violence, but without getting the empathy to the root of what the actual nature of the state violence is, the indoctrination, the brainwashing, and the harms people face because the government has literally stunted people's philosophical growth. I mean, I say this often. I'm just encapsulating it all as it is space age technology that we have, and we have like Stone Age philosophy, right?
Yeah.
We have the most incredible technology. Go to freaking space, and people are still thinking, man, I can't imagine how these roads could get built if it wasn't for the government. You know what I mean? It's that wild because you don't have that without the government working so hard with so many different programs of disinformation, brainwashing, control, and trauma to stunt that growth that would have happened if it wasn't for the government doing that, because it was happening before that in the 1800s with literacy rates rising and people becoming more intelligent generally, and general IQ rates rising with political stability through the 20th century and having better nutrition and so on and so forth. Philosophy should have had that same evolution, that same exponential curve.
Oh, yeah.
The government has stunted it for so long that people don't even know that. And now we're seeing it. Me and you, we are in it right now. We're in the beginnings of that exponential curve. We're in that never before seen, like, oh, Michael Malice and Joe Rogan are in a podcast. And there's Alex J, who, I don't know. I want to get, those two words together on the show. And Luke Rudkowski and Blair White and Tim Pool. And they're all talking about how bad the media and the government is. This is unreal. This is like, what? This sounds like a comic book story or something for libertarians. Right? It's like, wait, what? Like 20 years ago, you'd be like, what the heck? Jeff Dice was just on Fox News. He's, has been in there multiple times. You have Maj Touré going on there. You have Spike Cohen going on Kennedy, talking about things. We have international liberty groups, doing activism in Africa and Argentina and Brazil. We have, massive events with thousands of people in attendance at Freedom Fest, Pork Fest, Tom Woods 2000s. I mean, this is like, a miraculous. This is incredible. This is, unreal. And people are still like, I don't even know what to do with all this liberty stuff. There's so much I don't get. It's like, how there's like every type of libertarian, like it's a video game, like redhead libertarian, Hispanic libertarian, bearded libertarian, libertarians with guys Asian wise, right? It's like so much. Jewish libertarians. But that's the thing. It is an explosion. We're in a renaissance. We're in the midst of the beginnings to this 21st century intellectual renaissance. And we are just facing at this point in time the greatest tyranny of the remaining people who are, basically the children of the 20th century eugenics movement, who are still trying to carry out their plans, their Malthusian plans for reducing the population, offing people, getting more control over everybody. We are fighting that. We're at, the greatest cusp of liberty is fighting the greatest cusp of statism of all time. There's never been this great level of statism in terms of government so powerful and so rich. There's never been this many people who are like, oh, that's what it means to be libertarian. Okay, respect people's bodies, don't take for them. Okay, non-aggression principle. Like, we never had this. Like, never had this. This is wild for human history. Unless there is some crazy ancient aliens thing, right? No. But I'm just saying, like, for what we actually know as best as we can, right? This is unprecedented. We're in an unprecedented cultural battle. So I think people should be taking heart and not, in any way being shy from doing radical things and talking radically. Like this is the time to do it. Like, now is the time to be like, yeah, I'm getting my kids out of public school. Yeah, you know what? I'm supporting the Mises Institute. I'm going to support the Mises Caucus. I'm going to, help out with voluntarism in action for someone, who needs help getting it, out of school or something like that. Whatever it is, like, now is the time to support those promoting liberty, to take action yourself, and to say, hey, how can I not, involve the state in this? How can I think outside the state? And if more and more people do that in what they do best, their fields of interest, what they're passionate about, we're all going to win. We're all going to, end up in a great spot despite all the despotism. So that, that's just my call to action with like anybody who's, worried about like Twitter battles or infighting. Like, this is nonsense. Focus on actually trying to educate people in ethics and economics. Take actions that you are in control of, that you don't have to beg for permission from someone else. What can you do to support private alternatives? What can you do to live more outside the state, right? What can you do to help raise the next generation for liberty and, have them actually have a peaceful parenting home and have them be able to learn about ethics and economics so that they can become self-sufficient and take care of themselves and not be like, oh my gosh, I stubbed my toe. I guess we need socialism, that level of insanity. It's like, It's like, we're going to get there, but we have to keep working on it principally and radically and actively and openly, and it's changing. So as you've seen, at least
Yeah.
it's a podcast.
No, I agree. And, I think it's a great way to close this out. I mean, I think that I'm incredibly optimistic about the future. It's easy to focus on a lot of the really awful stuff that's happening, but I think you're right. I think as things have gotten worse in some ways, it's like when things are sort of like in that middle, it's hard to wake people up. But when I think the reason why there's like that expression that like the night is dark is just before the dawn. It's just like I think how that plays in here is just like things have to hit a certain point of bad to get people to see the bad. So the matrix is starting to collapse and people are waking up to the truth. And sometimes the truth is uncomfortable, but at the same time it's like when we see how much freer we'll be if we and how much better our lives will be if we abandon the notion that the only way to do these things is through these violent coercive monopolies. And through abusing people. And I mean, basically, like, I draw such a connection between peaceful parenting and statism all the time because, like, there's really no difference except on scale between parents spanking their kids to force them to comply with what they're telling them to do and what the state does to all of us. And it's like we kind of have to normalize the peaceful parenting in our own private lives and build that out to every interaction in human life to where we don't use violence as a means of getting people to do what we want. We use free market, we use persuasion, we use voluntarism, we trade with people, we negotiate with people. This is the foundation of a peaceful society and a society that where you're going to have the highest amount of well-being and humans living their lives to the fullest. So, yeah, 100% agree with everything you said there. Well, we're coming up to a close. You got anything coming up? I'm sure you do, but what stuff do you have coming up that you want to promote before we head out of here?
Well, I mean, yeah, I don't have anything coming up in the short term. I kind of have to uh, deal with all Christmas and famine and other stuff like that coming up, at the end of this month. But next year, yes, there will be some fun stuff. We're going to be doing the music video for "I Do Not Consent." Florida Man. We'll probably record 5 or 6 new songs at least. We're going to be throwing more events. We did some events last year, range events, stuff like that. We're going to be hopefully hosting a bunch more this upcoming year. And we're going to just be looking to do, as much creative, fun projects as we can and can fit in throughout the year with those things. And then, the big one will be the Voluntarist final issue for this arc, Voluntarist Origin 6. I plan on having that campaign and also turning the entire series into a trade paperback. I'm going to remake the first 2 issues, bring everything into cohesion, and then have it be a compendium, like a true graphic novel, kind of bigger book, trade paperback. So some ambitious projects, but all stuff that's, fun for liberty and trying to create the cultural changes for when people arrive, here. Because that's a big part of that is like sometimes when you come to a new ideological space, you're like, okay, well, what's fun in this town, right? What's the libertarian playground, right? For some people, originally it was like Pork Fest, or I'll go to a Macy's seminar, but we need more things than that. We have all different types of interests and demographics and age groups. And I just think it's been mind-blowingly incredible to see things like Tuttle Twins, right? Multi-million sales of books.
It's amazing.
Animated series. Like what? Like this is incredible. This is like, that's like Veggie Tales, but for libertarians.
Right.
Now.
Yeah.
Like, what? Like it's like unimaginable things, like just mind-blowingly amazing opportunities for entertainment and education, and sometimes both, on a wide, diverse range of content materials and outreach. And I'm floored. And I want to be a part of that. Like I want to do something that people love and want to support and that's worthy of it. I want to be worthy of being a part of that. But I just want to encourage everybody else that if you have something that you have artistically to contribute or intellectually or event wise, whatever it is, like go do it, man. Like time is short. Make this stuff happen. Have libertarian or whatever liberty get-togethers, have events, have concerts. If you write books, make art, have some fun. So
Move to Florida and harass Tom Woods.
Yeah, right. Harass Tom Woods, pretend it's his birthday. Yeah, whatever.
Oh God.
But yeah, I mean, it's just incredible. It really is humbling, having just spent so much time working on this stuff for years. I mean, thousands upon thousands of internet chat debates and memes and events and everything, and just finally like coming out behind all that, where it's like just used to getting ratioed by commies and being made fun of, right? And then the first they laughed at us, and then they started to argue with us, right? And then all of a sudden we're on that cusp of the winning. It's starting to
I
change.
know.
Like, yeah, actually, these people, yeah, they're right. Why are you stealing from me? Why are you tormenting our kids? So
My favorite one of those things is 2 years ago, like, the Mises caucus will never take over the LP.
I'm like, you guys have no idea what y'all are up against. I'm like, what do you think was going to happen? I mean, these people who they don't do anything. They literally just complain. They stay in a poverty mindset, not a growth mindset. They don't want to grow and change or develop their skills and provide value, and they just want to shame people and control their in group. And it just was so sad to me. Like, okay, well,
Yeah, but what matters is that Lou Rockwell wrote an article about the Mighty Ducks 20 years ago, and I'm still mad about that. It's like,
right. I mean, that was a funny article. I personally think it was silly, but it's just one of those things where it's like, okay, so he wrote a stupid article in
listen,
like
I love
96.
Lou. I
I
love
care?
Lou Rockwell, but Lou Rockwell is basically like your old crotchety grandfather of the Liberty Movement. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like every once in a while, your grandpa, he's just like at a family reunion, and you're just complaining about something stupid, and you're just like, okay, grandpa, whatever. It's like,
right.
but like, Lou Rockwell kept anarcho-capitalism alive, during a time period when like it seemed like the ideas were as dead as they could be. And now those
Yeah,
ideas are kind of going through a renaissance, like what you're talking about.
right.
So, it's silly. Some people only exist to critique and to try to tear down what other people build
Right.
instead of building something themselves. And I try to keep a pretty wide variety of circles and friends in the liberty movement. I got people like I'm obviously a Mises Caucus guy. I got friends that are like, agorism's the way. I got friends that are like, oh no, we're going to do the GOP, and I got friends that are doing all sorts of different things. And it's like, I have my opinions and disagreements with all them, but it's like, at least do something. Like I can put up with almost anybody who has different disagreements with me if you're doing something and you don't make it like your primary mission to shit on what everyone else is doing.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
I mean, It's like everyone's gonna have a different taste, different preference, and whatnot. But like, just do what you think is best. That you're what you feel led to contribute to the world to create, more liberty and to push the needle in the right direction. And you know, eh, focus on building and not destroying.
Yes. Yeah, I agree by and large. I mean, yeah, obviously there's places where, making critiques is appropriate if it's, to critiquing ideas, or if someone like, oh, you can only be libertarian if you have white skins, where it's like that's your whole thing. But it's like, when people are talking about incrementalism, or just different preferences for their personal activism, it's like, okay, who cares? Like, do you, whatever. You know what I mean? It's like, as long as you're not physically harming somebody, as long as you're not saying, okay, we need the government to be our savior. And as long as you're not saying, oh, you could only love liberty based on your race, you know what I mean? And trying to exclude other people and shame them out of being libertarians, then I don't care. It's like, you know,
Yep,
so yeah.
agreed. Well, hey Jack, thanks for coming back on again. Maybe you just plug your Twitter and any of your other handles and channels and stuff before we go, so people know where to follow you at.
Sure. Volcomic.com is good. That's V as in victory, VOLCOMIC. So volcomic.com. That's the main comic book website. I got a few other places, but it's just everywhere. So the other website would be like The Philosopher, THEPHOLO. So instead of I, like philosopher, it's PHO. So thephilosopher.com. I mean, between those two sites, you could probably find, most any of my work or size projects eventually.
I've been following Fo and like seeing the philosopher for so long that I literally the other day just like typing out the word philosophy, typed out philosophy. Like it wasn't like a typo. Like I literally was like, this is how you spell this word. It was like autocorrect. I was like, what? Oh.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I'm glad it's had that impact. The other impact we hope is like, people eventually think of us that we're like being paid off by like Big Pho. You know what I mean? The Vietnamese noodles, like, it's paying us. Like, yes, we're gonna make everybody want to eat pho noodles now. Ha ha ha. But
your Facebook food feed is the best. It's like you'll do like pho, and you're like matzo ball soup, and then it's like fancy steak, and it's just like pineapple and pizza. It's just like
I'm not a food snob. I had a Kobe steak the other night, but I will gladly eat chicken nuggets the next day. Like everybody eats food. I just happen to take some pictures when I eat. That's all. I mean,
yep. No, it's all good. Well, thanks again, Jack, for coming on. It was a lot of fun. We'll do it again sometime. Thanks everybody for watching and listening. And until next time, don't fear the fire.